looking at our Slack channels, you can see there's a lot of conversations about this right now. We had a lot of questions also come through the Money Matters channel about moving into self-employment. I also made this leap in 2019. So Eric, you and I have talked about this before. So there's a lot here. So yeah, let's jump in and let's talk about what it means to be your own boss.
Well, I'll tell you what, not only we help folks like yourself, but 20 years ago, my wife and I did it, almost 20 years ago to the day. And scariest thing in the world, being your own boss. The hard part is, what don't you know that you don't know, right? And how do you know where to start? And I think the biggest thing that you want to look at is focusing on what you do well, right? Like, what is your skill set, your shining thing that you can do to really make a big impact? And the rest of it is kind of a concept of, how do I find good people to help me so that I can focus on what I do well? Anything you do to distract you from what you do well means you're not going to make money. And so, I would assume most everybody on the conference here is in a situation where you want to make money. And so how do you do that, right? Over the years, my biggest experience has been folks that try to go out on their own, where they fail probably in the one place that's one of the easiest to deal with, but also, if you don't do it right, can be the biggest problem, is taxes, right? How do we deal with taxes? And while we make money, if we spend it and we don't keep some of it back to pay taxes, that's a problem. So hiring a good tax person is absolutely important. I would suggest that having somebody that understands what it means for a self-employed individual would be very helpful. Most of us don't really pay attention to our pay stubs, but Katie, you remember when you worked for the company you were with before, which will remain nameless at the moment, but they paid a part of your self-employment tax when you were an employee. And I think that was one of the biggest shocks to me was, wait a minute, I got to pay how much in tax? And I haven't even really made much, and so that can be a little bit of a surprise and a shock if you're not prepared for that. So you look at holding back funds to cover taxes. You look back at holding back funds to be able to cover emergencies that come up. And I think that's another area we see a big problem in the country today. The average person can't even pull together $1,000 for an emergency fund, which is kind of scary. Because as we all know, bad things happen, right? We've all gone through a pretty big experience here in the last 8 months that I don't think any of us intended. But I would say that events like this allow us to create opportunity and to evolve and to innovate. Some of the best companies in the world have come out of times like this. So, maybe your opportunity is that. And whether it's you're starting a business and working with a bunch of people eventually, or it's just yourself and you're kind of, how do you say, like a side hustle or something, right? So, I think when you pivot to self-employment, you look at things like having an emergency fund, having some good advisors around you to help with respect to, those things that you might not know or understand on a regular basis yourself. One of the things I thought I would do is, Katie shared with me some questions that people brought up ahead of time. And one of them was a really good one that I think really relates to when I pivot to becoming self-employed. And if you're going to be a consultant, one of the questions was, is an LLC best for tax purposes? And I think, while I'm not an attorney, I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express. Oh, wait, I'm not staying in hotels. All right, look, I work in finance. I don't work in comedy. But what I would say is this. An LLC is a legal entity that helps you from a protection standpoint. It's not necessarily from a tax perspective. What's going to drive the conversation about your tax situation is going to be, do you have employees or are you completely self-employed? So if you're self-employed, you're going to just file on your normal tax return, and there's a special, I can't remember if it's Schedule D or Schedule C, sorry. So Schedule C will be where you report a lot of the activity for your business. The other thing I think you want to look at when you're looking at pivoting to self-employment is understand what you need to be accounting for when it comes down to things like deductions and expenses. What most people don't recognize is that the tax code absolutely is geared towards business, not towards the individual. So if you work at a company and you have a W-2, you really don't get a lot of deductions. As an individual, you are going to have a standard deduction that was raised from $6,000 to $12,000 a couple years ago when the Tax Act of 2017 was put in place. And that really eliminated an ability for people to do a lot of deductions on their tax returns. So it simplified things, but it took away a lot of the things we used to keep in focus on. But being a self-employed individual, things that are related to the business are deductible. So if you have a cell phone, pay for it through the business, and that's going to be a business expense. So the way you want to kind of think about this is that being self-employed, there's kind of this imaginary line, if you will. It's actually real on the tax return, but anything above the line, you don't pay tax on. Anything below the line, it's after you've paid taxes. And so those business expenses are kind of above the line, which reduces your taxable income, if you will, which is a good thing. And that can save you anywhere from 15 to 40% in taxes, depending on where you live. Of course, one caveat, apologize for those of us in the United States, that's where that would apply. Outside the US, obviously, you'd want to look at your local jurisdiction in terms of what it means to you from a tax perspective. So that's where hiring a good CPA, certified public accountant, or in the States, we have what's also known as an enrolled agent. These are two forms of tax preparers that can defend you in front of the IRS. So the IRS can be scary and intimidating, but unless you're really, really bad, they're not going to send someone to your house and lock you up and take you away and put you in jail. But you know, ultimately, you don't want them to be on your bad side. So I think those are the kinds of things that we look at from being a self-employed individual, that when we work for somebody, we probably don't really think too much about that. Katie, any other thoughts or questions that people have brought up?
Yeah, I had one other question. So if someone is just starting to work for themselves, you know, and it's pretty new, so if they're doing freelance work or any kind of like contract work or consulting, and they're starting to get money coming in,
yeah,
is there a good percentage they should target that they should hold for tax purposes as they're starting out?
Sure, that's like a super huge open-ended question though, because one of the things that you run into is, you know, if you have somebody that you file your tax return with, say a spouse, you have to account for their income too. Now, if you're individual and you're single, I would say to you, the first thing you want to hold back is at least 15% to cover what it was known as the FICA taxes. Those are the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? Those are those entitlement programs that we all pay into. So holding back that money would be important. That'd be the first place I would start. The second thing I would look at is, depending on what state you live in, you may have state income tax to account for. So for instance, Katie lives in Ohio, and the top marginal tax rate is just under 5% in the state of Ohio. So if you held back 4% for state taxes in that instance, that would work. Now, if you live in California, which I do, it can be as high as 13%, but you got to make a lot of money for that to be the case. But so it depends on your state, right? Other states like Texas and Florida, they don't charge any state income tax, so you wouldn't have to withhold anything. So then you look at your federal income tax. And I would say to you, most people, if you withhold about 20% for federal income tax, you're going to eat into a good chunk of what you might owe for federal taxes. So if you add that up kind of quick here, 15 plus, let's call it 4 or 5 for the state, and then maybe 20 for the federal, you're almost at 40% of your income needs to be held back for taxes. That's why I say most people don't withhold enough, and then they get caught in a position where they go to file their taxes and they don't have the money to pay it. And the problem with not paying your taxes on time is not only do you have a penalty, but you have interest that you pay on those taxes if you don't pay them on time. So it's pretty serious. I mean, those penalties can range anywhere from maybe 5-6% of what you owe, and then you have tax interest on the penalties for each month that you go past that, and it's kind of expensive too. Better than going to a loan shark by all means, but nonetheless, it's expensive. And if it's planned properly, you shouldn't have to pay those penalties or taxes